Hi, you might remember me from my last video where I discussed the Dragon Ball YouTube community. I had a section in that video where I discussed power levels, and I made a kind of little funny sketch in it. And I also cut that sketch out and put it on a side channel, and that got a lot of views, and this video, for some reason, recently has been getting a good amount of views and comments. A lot of them regarding what I said about power scaling. A lot of them have really annoyed me, because I think a lot of people don't understand what power scaling is, and they have this very ludicrous misconception about it. So I'm going to be talking about that. What I think people miss about power scaling, and why a lot of Dragon Ball fans seem very misinformed about the series as a whole and why it works. So, what is power scaling? I'll give two definitions to it. Power scaling generally refers to a way to deduce a character's strength. This is the most common explanation of power scaling I see, but I think it leaves out a gigantic piece of context that is vital to understand its purpose. Thus, the second definition, and the one I think many people leave out when discussing Dragon Ball. This is my own personal one. Power scaling is a rough estimate on how powerful a character can be written while still being beholden to the writing structure in a satisfying way. A character is only as powerful as the story allows them to be. Why do I use this definition? Because it's something I see people completely ignore when they talk about the series as a whole, especially in regards to Super. If there's one thing I'm certain of more than anything about a majority of Dragon Ball fans, it's that they don't know what the fuck narrative flow is. While Dragon Ball has justifications in the story for how powerful each of the characters in it are, those justifications exist solely so that the story pans out in a very specific, satisfying way. While Z and Super handle this in different, albeit interesting ways, I've grown really tired of people seemingly missing the point over and over and over about how the story justifies itself sometimes. So I'd just like to make this video and hopefully make a case for why people should put narrative into consideration when talking about the series. So I'll start with some examples. So let's go all the way back to the Saiyan Saga, where I feel like Toriyama made one of his biggest mistakes that he took far too long to correct. Raditz shows up at the beginning of Z. He is wearing a scouter, which he uses to determine various characters' power levels. This also introduces the concept of power levels, which assigns a specific number to how strong a character can be. I know that power levels will raise, like, they introduce that whole thing with, like, oh yeah, humans can raise their power level just by, charging up and all that shit. The reason I still feel like it's a giant mistake is it puts such a specific number on how strong a character is that it kind of removes the importance of technique, but that's just my personal opinion. Anyways, everybody sees just how powerful Raditz is. He's so far above and beyond that Goku and Piccolo have to work together, and everybody has to go off and train to try and get ready for these Saiyans that are gonna come up soon. This is going to be the next arc, is the Saiyans are going to show up. They're even more powerful than Raditz, so everybody has to go and they have to train. Is the training important to the story? No. I mean, you can make the case that Gohan's character development is, but the actual training itself? No, it's not at all important. It's just there to justify a power boost for the next arc, and its sole purpose is to make sure everybody enters the fight at a level where they're at least as strong as Raditz, given the next villains are going to be much stronger than him. I'm not criticizing the fact that there is training and that it doesn't serve as much purpose as, or that it doesn't serve a purpose, I suppose. But I'm just saying that it's not as entertaining in the series to see a fight below a level than the previous one you just saw, which is the reason that they have training so often in Dragon Ball, is to justify moving up the next fight to a higher level, because you want to just see these characters grow and grow and grow exponentially. Literally, all that matters for training is that the character is stronger than they were the last time they showed up. When the cast goes to deal with Nappa and Vegeta, Nappa remarks about how each Cyberman is basically equal in power to Raditz. The point here is to instill the fear of just how strong Raditz was, given he was the last major fight in the story, and see that these supposedly lowly, pissant creatures are just as strong and terrifying as a villain who managed to force out the death of the main character. After everybody is defeated before Nappa, you really understand just how far above and beyond the Saiyans are compared to the characters we've known to be so strong before. Piccolo, Tien, not Yamcha. Enter Goku in the nick of time with the ever-famous...
It's over 9,000! What, 9,000? There's no way that can be right!
Demonstrating that he's returned far stronger than he was before, decimating Nappa swiftly. Seeing Goku demonstrate his power without so much as breaking a sweat against somebody who defeated all of the Z Fighters by himself, who also beat the Cybermen that were as strong as Raditz, really shows you how strong the guy's gotten after such a lengthy time of being dead. So, enter Vegeta. Goku gets some time to slap Vegeta around to show he's still pretty strong. But Vegeta comes back swinging, and it ends up being a pretty desperate fight until it comes down to that really famous Gallic Gun Kamehameha beam struggle. Skipping some other details, since you all know it, we see the crew with their powers combined. They barely edge out a win against Vegeta, against all the odds. And you really come to see how strong Vegeta was after all that, because it took everybody's strength to take him down. Like, he was super powerful. So why am I describing this? You already know this fight, obviously, if you're watching this video. Well, you understand the narrative flow here now, right? Most of the cast have gotten stronger than Raditz, but Nappa is stronger than the cast, and Goku is stronger than Nappa, and Vegeta is stronger than Goku, and Goku with Krillin, Gohan, and Yajirobe is stronger than Vegeta. How powerful each of the characters actually were in the story was entirely dependent on what was a satisfying way to write the story, and in a way that everybody got a chance to fight. Everybody's purpose was predetermined regardless of how long they trained and how strong people thought they were. Okay? That's my point. Power levels and power debates are completely trivial. No matter what number you slap on a Tien's power level in the Sand Saga, it is a completely meaningless number. Is its power level 3,000, 4,000, 5,000? No, Tien's power level is strong enough to hurt Nappa slightly, but not beat him and buy more time for Goku. That's all that matters. In the end, it seems super trivial to me to try and determine the strength of his character at this moment, because you have a very broad idea from the way the story is told, and you know from the get-go anyways, he is not going to be the one taking away the win. Power scaling is not some separate entity from the writing. The reason Dragon Ball's fights in sequential order end up being satisfying is because it uses power scaling massively to its advantage. Whether people want to admit it or not, the power scale is always going to be wonky. You can point to any number of moments in Dragon Ball and say, well, look, why didn't this character just do this then if they're this powerful? And your answer will 9 out of 10 times be, because that wouldn't make for as interesting or satisfying of a story. Like, if Tien was strong enough to hold down Imperfect Cell with his Neo Tri-Beam, why didn't he use that technique against the androids? If Goku was really strong enough to beat Buu the first time they fought, isn't his justification weak for not defeating him? If you changed either of those two moments, you get a pretty uninteresting conclusion where a lot of plot threads end up being unresolved and the protagonists don't get the big win. This is not without error on occasion, obviously, but I imagine you get the point I'm trying to drive across here. Dragon Ball has a multitude of objects or plot devices in its storytelling that only serve a purpose to power up the characters so that we get more cool fights. Piccolo's not strong enough to fight Frieza. Oh shit, looks like he can fuse with Nail and he's able to put up a decent fight now. Vegeta and Trunks aren't sure if they can beat Cell. Oh shit, look, Hyperbolic Time Chamber gives them the same power-up that Training Time Skips did before. Majin Buu is unbeatable and Goku has to return to Otherworld soon. Oh shit, have you guys heard of this thing called Fusion? Oh, there's not enough time to learn it and train up to be strong enough to fight Buu. Good thing we have the Hyperbolic Time Chamber to justify a couple of kids getting an even bigger power-up to coincide with that too. Point being, you can make up any number of random bullshit to insert into Dragon Ball to justify changing the power levels, so that certain fights happen, and those certain fights have certain outcomes. So when it comes to actual discussions of the series, I'm kind of mind-boggled that people never seem to actually give a shit about the quality of the overall narrative, so long as it stays within some very rigid perception of what power levels should be. I touched upon this in my last video, and the comments I got blew my fucking mind about how much people ignore the storytelling. This section is going to be a lot less about story structure and kind of my own observations and opinions about power scaling. I made a brief parody that got some decent attention from others about the episode where Super Saiyan Blue Goku and Krillin have a beam struggle on the roof of a skyscraper, joking about how some people take the power levels and scaling a little bit too seriously. That was all the joke was meant to be. I got a lot of positive response, but some of the comments were just so patently retarded I could not believe it. Krillin shouldn't have stood even the slightest chance. Krillin should have been obliterated into a million billion pieces. Goku didn't need to use Super Saiyan Blue. I imagine these comments are viewed strictly through the first definition of power scaling I'd mentioned earlier, that doesn't consider the need to tell an actual story. Is there actually anything interesting about a story where Goku just beats the shit out of Krillin and Krillin's just like,
Ah, shit, man, I'm such a weak little pussy, Goku. I don't even compare to you and your Super Chad 3, let alone Super Chad God, Goku.
no, that is so fucking boring. Is it consistent with the power scaling? Obviously, nobody expects Krillin to put up enough power to make Goku start to sweat a little bit, so it's not what people perceived the current power levels to be at the time. But is it not more satisfying to see a character that you get this scene with where they remember their fight at the tournament and how they've always been best friends and they used to be kind of on par with one another to some degree, and that Krillin sees Goku just so far and above and beyond himself, and even though he knows he's never going to surpass Goku again, like, he makes Goku realize, like, oh man, wow, Krillin's not actually as weak as I thought he was. You know, it's not to show that Goku is weak, it's to show that Krillin has gained his confidence back and that he's able to fight more confidently now. You know, it's not about keeping the series strictly within what we perceive the powers to be before, because, you know, it's just this math equation where we know who's going to fight who and who's going to beat who. It's this arc we get where Krillin struggles with his own confidence. He feels like very self-conscious about not being a fighter capable of, you know, being helpful anymore like he used to be. It's a lot of throwback to when Krillin was actually useful, even though he hasn't been for a long time. And we get this scene where he makes Goku realize, like, oh man, like, Krillin's not as weak as I thought he was. You know, he made me actually have to, you know, put a little bit more push into the Kamehameha, which isn't even that big of a deal. It's just that, you know, he put a little bit more into it and he had to. And that was it. It wasn't like Goku was on the ropes or anything. So I don't understand what the issue is that people have with writing something that it just feels like people want there to be just this consistency that is so rigid. I know I've said that many times, but there's such a lack of care for the actual story of Dragon Ball from some people, which I think is ridiculous, because at that point, like, why are you even watching the show? You might as well just write out the numbers that every character is, like, strength-wise, and then, you know, every now and then if you feel like throwing in a new form, just, you know, there's a new conclusion. It really feels like sometimes some fans can't see the forest for the trees. Toriyama could literally write that Krillin pumped all of his energy into this special Senzu being that, when eaten, multiplies his power 1,000-fold for 2 minutes, putting him on par with Super Saiyan Blue Goku. And it would make just as much sense as the introduction of fusion into the series. And people would still find a reason to bitch about it too. There's this stigma that they have to stick to these very rigid ideas of who is what power. And it's such a massive limit on telling a fun and interesting story with characters that grow. Just some of the moments where power scaling is thrown to the wayside, even just a little bit, are, like, to an acceptable amount, end up being some of, like, the best, most memorable moments in fucking Dragon Ball Z. Like, Tien holding down Cell with his Neo Tri-Beam. Like, it was such a interesting scene to see a side character not be able to damage a villain, but punch, you know, fucking 5 weight classes up against somebody and still be able to contribute, you know? When you get rid of all the silly explanations and plot devices that justify somebody's strength in the story, or some people very stupidly equate some of them to ass pulls, you've essentially removed such a vital part of the backbone of Dragon Ball. Okay, I think I've at least basically established my point that I can boil it down before moving on. Power scaling is entirely dependent on what direction the story would like to go, and it really just tags along for the ride of what the story is going to be. You can analyze into further specifics if you want, but it kind of seems a little absurd to me, because it's just so over analytical that it kind of feels like you're missing the point that the author is trying to convey, and you're really just looking at the nitty-gritty details that aren't important. It's not a math formula. The show tried to do numbers, and Toriyama threw those out after it became abundantly clear that power levels just muddled the suspension of disbelief in power boosts. It was unbelievable how some characters could, like, when you look at the math, like, go up such a high number so suddenly, or just, like, from, you know, punching empty air in a chamber for 2 years. It's just like, what? But anyways, now with that out of the way, I've got a couple other things I want to clear up that the show made clear even back when power levels were a thing that everybody still seems to ignore. Okay, you ready? This is important. Get out your pencil and paper. Technique is not the same thing as power levels. You hear that right? Good, because people, holy goddamn people, don't seem to get this enough, even though the series beats you over the head with it. Even if a character is much stronger than another, that doesn't make a technique ineffective against that character. The Destructo Disc is a perfect example of this. That shit literally cuts everything except Jiren. The evil containment wave can seal away just about everybody. Boo can turn just about anybody into candy. Beerus can destroy matter itself. I know I did earlier, but it was kind of unscripted, but I'm going to defend Super again for a minute, so if that pisses in your cereal from the word go, just hear me out, whatever. The one thing that I've actually enjoyed about Super more than much of the latter half of Z is that it's returned to an emphasis on technique that the original Dragon Ball had a larger focus on. As I mentioned earlier, the evil containment wave made a return a couple of times in 2 different arcs in Super, and I thought that the dynamic in fights was much more interesting, because it allowed the weaker characters on the power scale, while still allowing them to obviously be weaker than Goku and Vegeta. It allowed them to participate with top tier fighters, on a more even level when the series is written to allow them to stand a chance to do something other than get hit by an energy blast and then fall to the ground. You know, even if they're bound by the rules of the story, this allows them to provide a more interesting usage than throwing out an energy attack that you know is just going to kick up some dust and then the enemy's going to be fine. It's stuff like this that is more reminiscent of a time when even the fodder characters got a chance to do something because they provided something other than magically punching harder or faster than the last time they fought somebody. Stuff like this is just further proof that power scaling debates are bullshit. The further down the rabbit hole you want to go when you have to consider what a weaker character like Roshi is capable of with a technique that can seal away somebody of vastly stronger power than himself, like Frost. But, you know, hey, then people can't make a bunch of videos debating a bunch of trivial numbers about a show that, you know, is pretty simple for clickbait, but, you know, whatever. All right, one last thing before you slam your keyboard on your desk and you start writing a fucking furious dissertation about why I'm fucking retarded. Let's talk transformations. Obviously it's important to Dragon Ball. They kind of fall under technique, but they're generally just temporary power boosters, so I'll make it its own thing to talk about, but I'll be pretty brief like I said. What transformation a character uses isn't supposed to be an indication of what level of power they're on. It's just meant to display that they've boosted their power from what it was before by a certain amount. I feel like it's incredibly apparent Caulifla going Super Saiyan 2 isn't meant to show that she's only at the same level Gohan was during the Cell Saga, but some people interpret it this way for God knows why. But, you know, that's the basic gist of it. Maybe I'll do another video on the Universe 6 Saiyans, but we'll see. I feel like I could rant on forever about all this stuff, but I don't really want to bore you with the details so long as you get the general idea across. The last thing I'll say in regards to power scaling, that is, with transformations. If you really want the truth about what a transformation is to Dragon Ball, it is not a sort of multiplier, except for Kaioken, but even that number is kind of arbitrary. Everything else, though, every other transformation isn't some sort of power level multiplier. Transformations in Dragon Ball are excuses for a character to start coming out ahead and fight on a higher level against the opponent they were losing to before, and to look cool as fuck and shiny and new at the same time, if you really want the truth of it. That's all they are. And to look for anything much further than that in terms of depth, unless the show explicitly states as much, is pretty nonsensical in my opinion. I know that might have come across as a little blunt, might think I'm an asshole, but it's how I feel about a lot of really hardcore analysis on a show that clearly doesn't put itself under the same scrutiny that its fans do. Alright, I'm gonna edit this in really quick because I know that if I don't put this in here, people are gonna bitch. No, power levels are not always consistent in a way that is satisfying. Tien's fucking episode in the Tournament of Power was fucking awful. It was garbage. It was fucking incredibly stupid. Power levels in Super, yeah, generally they're not as consistent as Z was. Yeah, that's true. One last thing, though, that I want to get out of the way. It's because I know I'm going to get a lot of comments of people saying, like, oh, man, God, Super sucks. You see the new episode where the latest episode of Super where it was awful still? It's like, dude, you have had 120 episodes plus to realize you don't like it, but yet you still watch it. That is such a huge time commitment to watch something that you dislike. If you don't like Super, I'm fine with that. Like that's totally understandable. I understand why people don't like Super, even though I personally think it's all right. But like, if you don't like Super, just, you've had so long to understand you don't like it and then just stop watching it. Anyways, that's it for this video. Go and shit on me in the comments if you want. I know this is kind of not what a lot of Dragon Ball fans think. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. If you want me to talk about anything else, just let me know. If it's interesting enough, I'll go for it, and if there's enough want. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I kind of made this in like 3 days, honestly. I appreciate you guys leaving comments, you know, and listening to what I have to say. It's really cool. So anyways, yeah, no, thanks for sticking around to the end. I'm Pinwheel, and I will see you guys around.
Shut up!